today I thought I would talk a little bit about a research project that I just published, and it's related to COVID mask wearing, which is why I thought it might be interesting for everyone to think about a little bit. So, when we think about masks, most of the research shows that wearing a mask clearly affects those around us, right? When we're sick and we wear a mask, it usually benefits other people. The research on how beneficial it is to us to wear a mask is a little bit mixed, although generally with the recent COVID outbreak, most of the research says that it's better to wear it than not to wear it, right? But there's a slight cost to wearing a mask, right? You have to put it on, or you have to buy it, or you have to show people that you're wearing a mask, or whatever it is, there might be some kind of social cost associated with it. And in some cultures, it's even stronger, right? So in Japan, for example, there's less of a social issue wearing a mask, whereas in the United States, there might be a bigger issue wearing a mask. People think you might be strange or something like that. So it differs depending on the culture. But the interesting thing about mask wearing is that it affects others much more than it affects you, right? So the costs are generally your costs to wearing a mask, whereas the benefits are much higher for other people. And this makes it a kind of interesting game theoretic example that we can use some simple 2x2 games to illustrate how people might relate to others and what kind of outcomes they might have when they're deciding whether or not to wear a mask based on these game theory and rational principles. So generally speaking, there are two games that might represent the kind of behavior that we're talking about here. So for both games, there's two options available. Either you can wear a mask or you can not wear a mask, right? And there's two actors in both of these games. And the actors are the individual person who's trying to decide and the greater group or society or whoever's around them, whether they wear a mask or not. And that creates four possible outcomes, right? And these four outcomes are both society or the group and the individual wear a mask. One wears a mask and one doesn't, or both don't, right? And that creates four different outcomes. Now, the benefit and the costs differ though. So if we look first at the prisoner's dilemma model, we can say that when I wear a mask and no one else wears a mask, I become what's known as the sucker, right? Because I'm incurring the cost of wearing a mask. The benefits are to the other people around me, but I'm not really getting much benefit from them not wearing masks, right? If they were all wearing masks, I would get a lot more benefit. If everybody wears masks, now that's the most societal, optimal position, right? So everybody's wearing a mask and everybody gets the highest benefit. Nobody gets sick. Nobody spreads the disease around. Now, the issue with that, though, is that if everybody else is wearing a mask, then why should I, right? I'm incurring the cost of wearing a mask, but the benefits come from everyone else wearing a mask. So if everyone else wears a mask, I get the benefits. And I don't need to wear a mask. So I prefer to take my mask off if everybody else is wearing them. Why should I incur that cost, right? So now, that doesn't include the possible social cost that if everybody else is wearing them and you're not wearing it, you might feel uncomfortable in that circumstance. But generally speaking, we're going to assume that there's a cost to wearing the mask and that there's not a social stigma if everyone's wearing them and you're not. Although we can adjust that for the other model. So in this case, you prefer not to wear it while everyone else wears it, right? That's the free rider, right? Where you're taking advantage of everyone else wearing the mask. Now, Nash equilibrium, however, is a case where no one wears a mask, right? Because everyone prefers that everyone else wears a mask, but they prefer that they don't want to wear them themselves. And so we end up in a situation where we have a suboptimal outcome, where no one wears a mask, and if you wear a mask, you're the sucker because you're not getting much benefit from that mask, and everyone else is getting all the benefit. So that's the prisoner's dilemma model, and it suggests that most people won't wear a mask. On the other hand, we could sort of design a different model that might resemble this situation because we have slightly different assumptions. Now, in this case, we can have the possibility that there are sort of two equilibria. Now, when we talk about tipping point models, oftentimes we think about the situation where everyone's either wearing masks or everyone's either not wearing a mask. Now, this is might resemble more of reality because we do have a social stigma. Right, so if you are in a group and everyone's wearing a mask and you're not wearing a mask, you might feel a little uncomfortable and strange. So the cost increases when you're in this group and you're sort of behaving differently than other people, right? And at the same time, if everyone's not wearing a mask and you're wearing one, you might also feel a little bit uncomfortable. And additionally, there's that cost that you incur wearing the mask, and no benefit because no one else is wearing it. So you're not getting actually much benefit from wearing a mask when no one else is wearing the mask, right? So in this case, we end up in a situation where we have two equilibria. One is much greater benefit than the other. And the greater benefit is when everyone's wearing the masks because everyone benefits everyone else. But again, if you take your mask off, there's an increased cost to that because there's a social stigma associated with not wearing it when everyone else is wearing it. On the other hand, we have a situation where no one wears masks because there is a cost to wearing a mask. And if you wear one when no one else is wearing one, you feel a little silly and you're not really incurring any benefits from wearing that mask. So this is a little different. This is called the tipping point model. And in this case, we have two equilibria. One is clearly much better than the other. Now, what's the point of all this, right? Now, the point of all this is to kind of illustrate what we can do to encourage people to wear masks a little bit more. So in order to sort of understand how we can change people's behavior or how this research might help us encourage mask wearing, we have to look at some other research that's been done in the past, particularly research done on foot binding in China, and then it was later applied to infibulation. So Chinese foot binding was a practice primarily of the elite to sort of encourage uncertainty or decrease uncertainty around paternity concerns and reduce the movement of escorts. The issue here is that when you have a practice that is primarily conducted among the elites, if non-elite members wish to enter that elite class, they also have to conduct that practice. So basically this practice spread among a large number of population because fathers wanted their daughters to be able to enter into the elite class, and this required them to basically bound their daughters' feet. And this was one of those cases where it was sort of a tipping point model, and everyone had to do the foot binding. If you didn't, you looked strange, and there was a social stigma against it. Now, foot binding disappeared in China, and Mackey identified two basic factors that encouraged the sort of destruction of this practice. One of them was industrial changes that encouraged people to sort of stand on their feet a little bit longer. And so these were sort of societal changes in norms that might have made it difficult for the foot-bound women to actually work in factories and things like that. And they had whole groups of villages and communities sort of promise each other that they wouldn't bind their daughters' feet, and it encouraged larger and larger groups to not bind their feet. Now, this research was also applied to infibulation, the practice of infibulation, right? So the idea was very similar, to encourage Western norms into these sort of groups of individuals and to get them all together in a single group and get them to promise each other that they wouldn't conduct this practice any longer. And this actually worked in several villages, and they actually stopped practicing. They shifted the equilibrium from this sort of costly one where everyone is conducting these practices on their daughters to one where no one was practicing this infibulation on their daughters, right? And it was the same kind of mechanism, basically introducing some Western norms and then encouraging common knowledge among the group to get them to promise that they would no longer conduct these practices. So we can think about these as very similar to mask wearing in a sense. Mask wearing is also a social norm, and so when we look at, for example, Japanese society, many people wear masks. It's a norm. There's nothing wrong with wearing a mask in public ever. Whereas in the Western society, it's much less a norm, right? So if you want to encourage Western society to wear more masks, you can bring these sort of norms from Asia or from Japan and other countries in Asia, not necessarily just Japan, to Western society and try to encourage those norms in the West, right? In addition, we want to create common knowledge among groups of people. So we want to bring a bunch of people together and let them promise each other that they will all wear masks. It creates a social stigma against wearing a mask. It creates a social stigma so that if you don't wear a mask, you look weird. You look strange, right? And so in the same way that foot binding practices would make you look strange in Chinese society after they changed their sort of norms and rules, and infibulation might make you less suitable as a spouse later on, once the practice shifted from one equilibria to the other, we can create a situation where it becomes strange not to wear a mask in public in Western society. And the beauty of all of this is that it doesn't require any kind of harsh regulations from the government or any kind of punishment for people who don't wear masks. The punishment occurs through societal norms. When you don't wear a mask, people look at you funny. They might say things to you and encourage you to wear a mask because you will feel uncomfortable not doing so. So hopefully this research was interesting for you. The paper is being published in the Urbos Journal of Asian and International Bioethics this month. And I encourage you to take a look at that paper and have a read. And feel free to comment or give me any suggestions, anything you want. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and push that bell. It will send you any links or any information when I publish new material. If you have any comments or questions on anything, or if you want me to talk about something in the future, feel free to make a note in the comment or let me know privately.